Hi, so in this video I'm going to be showing you how to put a cuff on a shirt sleeve. So I'm going to show you first of all, the couple pattern pieces that you need. This first one would be your actual cuff pattern. And as you can see, I have it all marked out. You would determine your measurement based on your pattern, your design, and also by measuring your hand. But so for example, this is an 8.5 inch cuff with an extra 1 inch extension. So my original pattern was 8.5 wide, and then I add 1 inch on there to make it 9.5 because I've added on the extension. And I've determined that I want a 2 inch finished cuff, so I'm going to have a 4 inch pattern piece with a fold over. This is all measurements before the seam allowance is added. And then also you can see here, when I said 8.5 would have been to here, I added my 1 extra inch extension to the end of the pattern. I also centered my button placement with a little dot there, which is on the center of that, like this extension line. And then over here I added my buttonhole. So from the end of the pattern I went over 3/4 of an inch, and then whatever my buttonhole measurement would be, you'd put there. And my grain line in this case is going, this is my straight grain here, but in some cases you may want it on the cross, so I put both on the pattern. And then you're going to cut your interfacing piece here. I have some words written on here. So normally if I just wanted a regular one without an extension, mine was 2 inches by 8.5. So the 2 inches is to fit in to this final piece, right in here, right? We don't need the 4 inches for the interfacing. So then so whatever the width is, and then the length, and you can also see that I'm not extending the interfacing into the seam allowances. This is just one method. There's plenty of times you could just go ahead and you can cut the whole, right down to the seam allowance if you need to. So those are the two pieces there, and then I have, just show you what it looks like. I went ahead and I cut my interfacing, and I ironed it on inside that seam allowance up into my fold line, which is noted here, and this is on my wrong side of my fabric. I made sure I have my notches cut here where the extension, let's see if you can see it, where the extension is, okay? And then I've marked my right side of the fabric with my seam allowance just for demonstration. The other piece you will need is your sleeve with whatever placket closure you have on here. So I'm demoing today with the continuous lap method, if you can see that in the dark. Okay, so it's almost like a binding that goes around. I do have a video that talks about how to add this on. And then if you see here at the end, like this side is open, meaning like it lays flat and I don't fold it under, and this side of the continuous lap is folded under. Okay, this will be when I have the sleeve on. This folds towards the back, for example. Let me see if I can fold it over like that. So this would be where my extension would go on this side that's folded under. Okay, so I'm going to start to demo that and how to add everything on and sew it on. So the first step we're going to do, I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, but I'm going to fold right sides together because I want to close up this extension right here. So I'm going to fold up my notches, make sure they line up. And so I will be stitching from, let me move this out of the way. I'll be stitching from the notch line, exactly from the notch line over and then down this extension just to form this. Okay. Let's start here. Put my needle down by hand. And I'm going to go back stitch 2 times and then forward, and I'm going to go to the corner, and then I will leave my needle in and pivot. Then I'm just going to stitch, like I had said, right to the notch. And it's very important that when you get there that you do back stitch here, because we're going to be clipping right to that. if you can see. So now I am going to go ahead and take my scissor and I'm going to clip that notch almost to my stitches. You don't want to go too far. Okay, and then I want you to miter the corner here, and you will grade your seam allowances. Remember to grade them. You see, hopefully you can see in the camera, it's two different lengths. You don't want to just lop it off and trim it, because it'll just get too bulky. I'm just using muslin, so obviously that won't really add bulk, but if you're having something thicker, right? But you do want to make sure that your corners are nice and clearly clipped. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is turn this inside out. You're going to want to pull your corners out nice. You can use a point press, or not a point press, point turner. I'm just going to do it quickly with the pin. Whoops. Okay. Alright, so now this is what you'll have. You'll have your extension here, nice and neat. You'll have this clipped. You'll have that edge up like that. And now I'm going to want to take it over to my my sleeve cuff, and we're going to pin this on. Okay, so remember I have my cuff, and this is the side that's turned under. I'm going to take the right side of my shirt cuff with the extension side, and I'm going to pin just the one layer of the seam allowance to the edge of the cuff and sleeve and continuous lap. So you see it's lined up nicely. You need to have that right on the edge, and then I will pin it, matching all my whatever other notches or markings you have. And this shirt has a couple of pleats. And I'll go to my other side. And I'm just going to put this one up to the seam allowance here. Then you just want to make sure everything lines up. Okay, so this is what you're going to have. You're going to have your extension here. You're going to take one layer and you're going to pin all of this down, and you're going to stop where your seam allowance is. We're going to close this up after, okay? Sometimes you can close it ahead of time, but I prefer to show it to you this way. Okay, so I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and stitch that up. So I would like you to always remember to hand baste this line first, but because I'm just doing the video, I want to not have to spend the time doing that. I'm actually going to have you sew it from the cuff side facing up. And sew inside that end seam allowance, back stitch, and then just go ahead and sew this all the way down. Okay, and remember we have this clip here, this little notched area. Just make sure everything is still lined up, and if you hand baste it, it will be. And you're going to stitch right to the edge of that. I'm going slow to make sure I don't overstitch and catch my cuff. And then I'm going to, oops, the back stitching. I'm going to do some, I'm going to just go over that. You should back stitch there. I'm going a little too far. Okay. So now I'm going to be able to turn this edge under and clean finish that really nice right there. That's just my extra threads, you can see. I will pull those out after, but I want you to be able to clearly see I'm pushing my seam allowance up into that cuff like so. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pin all of this down. Actually, I'm going to do one more thing. It'll be easier for you. I should have did it first, sorry. I'm going to have you take this seam allowance and pull this up here. So this is the other edge, right? You want to line your seams up and then you're going to fold this one back. Hopefully you can see that, right? So I'm lining that up. So I'll clean finish this edge of the cuff first. It'll be a little bit easier then. And I'm going to go down on my 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you want to put your needle down and not catch the binding that's there on the other side for the continuous lap. You're going to back stitch 2 stitches and back stitch, and then we will again just miter your corner a little bit and then grade this down, and then turn this one as well. And now you go ahead and fold all that seam allowance up into the cuff and line up your line that you already marked. And back to this edge here. And just like in other demos I've showed you, you want this fabric to just touch the seam allowance because you're going to sew right there. When you stitch, you don't want the stitching to come back onto the shirt. It's not thick enough and it won't support it. So you want it to catch all that seam allowance to add some support to it. Use my fingers. I'm trying to push the last in and make it neat. Just going to take it out of the camera for a second to do that. Okay. Now you can go ahead and top stitch this. If you have a top stitching foot, that would be really great. I don't have one on this machine right now. So I'm going to start as close to where that binding. I'm going to edge stitch as close as possible. And this would be basted as well, okay? Keep that in mind every time. Okay, and there's your shirt cuff. So that's the inside, and this is my outside. And I had the extension on there. So this was the fold here. and then I added my 1-inch extension. So this would be where I'd put my button, or my buttonhole would be on here, my button would be on the back, and then you'd have this little extension. If you wanted to make this with top stitching, you can go now all the way around and make it finished, for a different look. Just top stitch it all the way around. And that's, let me open it here, and that's how it should look.